I've been in and out of prisons and jails ever since I was 17. I thought that I had seen it all. Brotherhood members attacking guards, wars, escapes, and attack. I saw many things that still give me nightmares to this day. "McDonald, 402202, the guard barked out. I jumped up, the thin mattress under me exhaling a whiff of stale air. I looked through the bars, seeing Correctional Officer Shay. Shay was a morbidly obese man with a penchant for being loud and lazy. I had seen a member of the Bloods punch him straight in the nose before, a scene that I still remembered with some humor. Shay had crumpled like wet paper on the floor, screaming and crying as more COs ran over and tackled the inmate. "Yeah?" I asked. Shay handed me a sheet of paper. He regarded me with his gray, colorless eyes. "Congratulations, you're being transferred. Pack up your stuff. This is your last day at Springfield Correctional Center." Now you might think that I would be happy to get a transfer. The Springfield Correctional Center was after all a dump. The food was terrible and always cold, and the place always smelled like bleach and chemicals. And at night it got so cold with only my flimsy sheet that I often woke up shivering. The building was nearly a century old, and the fact that it was still functional at all was a miracle in itself. But to be honest, I wasn't thrilled about the transfer. I had made friends here and knew the lay of the land. I didn't have to worry about getting jumped or attacked in the showers. As the old adage goes, it's better the devil you know than the one that you don't. I was let out of my cell the next evening with all the worldly possessions that I owned, which fit neatly into a clear trash bag with room to spare. I owned some prison clothes, a toothpaste, a toothbrush, deodorant, a Bible, a pair of sandals, and a radio. I felt the unbearable lightness of my existence reflected in that bag as it smacked rhythmically against my leg. "Good luck, friend Josh," a rather insane acquaintance of mine named Alvin called out from his cell as I passed down the bleak, concrete hallway. "Take care, man. I hope we meet again on the outside," I said, waving, knowing that I would almost certainly never see any of these people again. Heck, I hadn't even seen my family in over 5 years. None of them came to visit me anymore. No one wrote me letters or put money in my commissary account or sent me books to read. Well, we're all born alone and we all die alone, I thought to myself as Shay walked by my side. He was breathing heavily as if he had just finished running a marathon. I looked over at his face, seeing the burst capillaries on his nose from years of hard drinking and the squint of his little piggy eyes. There was a slight gleam of intelligence and slyness behind that ugly mug, though. "Well, amigo," Shay said in his slow and plodding way, "I got a sign to go with you. I'll be your ride-along buddy. You excited or what?" I smiled faintly at him. "There are worse people than you here, Shay," I said. "Far worse." I got on the prison bus in my bright orange jumpsuit. To my surprise, I saw the back was nearly empty. There was only one other prisoner in the back. Shay sat with us to monitor us, and we were also handcuffed and ankle-cuffed. A chain ran down and connected the two. I looked over at the other prisoner, a black guy with a shaved head. I think he also shaved his eyebrows. I mean, I literally didn't see a single hair on his head besides eyelashes, which he apparently hadn't found a way to shave yet. "Sup," he said, and I nodded. "Sup." We sat there in awkward silence as Shay plopped down hard on the bench between us. It groaned like a confused old man. "So, what do you know about this place, Shay?" I asked. He sucked down half a bottle of Coke and then heaved a deep sigh. "I don't know much about it, to be frank," he admitted sheepishly. "It's apparently brand new, though. They asked us to send a couple people who met certain criteria." "What does that mean?" the black guy asked. Shay gave him a serious look. Oh, come on, Timmy, you know what I mean. Hardened criminals. People with long records who tour prisons like some people tour French beaches. I scoffed. There are far worse people than me in prison, I said. Well, they asked for no murderers or people affiliated with gangs, and I don't know why, but maybe it's some new government program. They apparently call it an experimental prison. What about me? Timmy asked. Shay apparently knew what he meant. You're not a murderer, Timmy, Shay said, his lips forming the faintest twitch of a smile. You never. Well, there was that time my girlfriend got me to drop some acid with her. She went and killed her parents and then we hit the road, Timmy said fondly, his eyes rising as if he were looking at a hovering angel in the far-off distance. You were never convicted of any accessory charges, so it doesn't count, Shay retorted. Oh, it counts, Timmy drawled in a slow, plodding way. It counts, everything in life counts. If I've learned anything in the last 36 years, it's that you can never truly escape anything that you've done, good or bad. I couldn't see much from the prison van. There is a small, shatterproof window in these swinging back doors, but it only gave a fleeting view of what was behind us. I noticed the dark forest stretching out to the horizon over rolling hills. We drove for a few hours. The three of us talked about everything from sports to politics to the recent spate of fatal stabbings at SEC. I felt the van stop. I looked out the back window, seeing more endless trees. I didn't see a single house or car on the road that we had taken. This place is a ghost town, I said. Shay nodded. Yeah, it's dead as Frank Sinatra around here, Shay said, wheezing out a high-pitched laugh at his own joke. This area used to be big for coal mining, but as it dried up and people lost their jobs, they moved away. You know, my grandfather was a coal miner. Good place to build a prison, huh? Timmy asked. If there's no one around. We were cut off by a clanging alarm up ahead. I heard something large moving, probably the gate opening, and then we were inside. I saw the guard towers and rolls of razor wire for a brief moment as the van pulled into an open garage. The darkness immediately blanketed us. The garage door slowly rolled shut behind us. Shay jumped up. Let's get you boys inside so you can take off your handcuffs and everything, he said, motioning for us to follow. He pulled out a flashlight from his belt, guiding us through the pitch black. The dim light sent shadows racing across the room like groping tentacles. I caught glimpses of strange objects in the darkness. They looked like medieval torture devices. What is this place? I whispered. My voice echoed far too loudly off the cold concrete floor and walls. Yeah, those look like torture devices on that table, Shay. I think those things are thumb screws that might be a pair of anguish. I pointed to the pear-shaped object with 3 wicked blades whose points came together sitting on a dusty shelf. The ornate handle had springs connected to it. The object could be forced into any human orifice, and when the springs were engaged, it would open like a flower inside the person's body, ripping them apart and enlarging that orifice into a hole. How do you know so much about this? Shay asked, giving me a strange look. He narrowed his little piggy eyes. He continued to fumble with the flashlight, peering around for a door to exit the garage. I looked back at the car and saw the driver just sitting there, his entire body as lifeless and still as a mannequin. I've read a few books, I said as Timmy interrupted us. I see little red lights glowing under that door, Timmy said. Shay focused his flashlight on the spot. Across the room, I noticed what Timmy was pointing at. It was an ancient-looking black door. The wood had started to crack and splinter down the middle. Engraved in silver on the front, it said, "Entrance to North Frost Penitentiary." "Hello," Shay called toward the door as the 3 of us moved forward, the steel chains giving my steps a clinking rhythm. Shay reached the antique crystal doorknob. Timmy and I stood next to a dust-covered and brazen bull, its bronze mouth wide open as if it was silently roaring at us. As Shay pulled open the door, crimson light flooded into the garage. Tinted black glass covered the back wall. A speaker button sat next to the window. I looked to my right, seeing a massive sign sprawled across the wall there. It read, "Rules for Personal Conduct at North Frost. 1. The COs without faces don't work here and we don't know who they are. If you see one, press one of the buttons labeled Emergency Dispatch that are scattered around the complex. 2. When the red emergency lights come on, hide until they shut off. 3. Do not go into the medical ward for any reason. 4. The warden roams the prison every night at 3:33 a.m. looking for human meat. Don't let him catch you." "What is this, a joke?" Timmy asked, his face forming into a scowl. Well," Shay rubbed the back of his neck, looking like a little obese boy who had lost his parents. "I've never been here before, but this is all pretty unusual, I have to admit." A buzzing came from the back of the room and suddenly, a garish, echoing intercom turned on. "Please remove their chains and direct them through the door on the left," a female robotic voice said, calmly in a tone as cool as lemonade on a hot day. "Your transfer will then be complete." Shay sighed in relief. "Good," he grunted. "This place gives me the creeps." "Bro, you can't just leave us here," Timmy protested. "What the heck is this place? Where is everyone? Why is there a room filled with bloody ancient torture devices next to the garage?" Shay put up his hands. "I'm sorry, son, but I have orders. I'm just a messenger here. I was told to transfer you here, and that's what I've done." He fumbled around his belt for his keyring. He came over and unlocked the handcuffs and ankle cuffs from both of us. I stretched, rubbing my wrists. I was glad to be out of those suffocating restraints. Thanks for everything then," I said, picking up my extremely light garbage bag of possessions and heading for the door on the left. Timmy reluctantly followed behind. A sign on this door read, "To General Population." But when we got to the other side and it slammed shut behind us, I found a hallway filled with more red emergency lights streaming down. An involuntary shiver ran through my body. I remembered those absurd rules that somebody had put up. What had it said about the red lights? My mind raced for a few moments and then the answer popped up. It said to hide. A man shrieked up ahead, his voice riddled with agony and terror. The hallway split to the right and left and I couldn't see anyone. Timmy and I stopped. Dude, screw this," Timmy said, turning and running back toward the door that we had come through. He tried pulling it open, but it was firmly locked. The scream came again, louder and closer, but this time it was cut off suddenly. I heard someone gurgling like a man with a slit throat trying to breathe. And then everything went deathly silent again. The gray concrete floor of the hallway had arrows pointing forward on it. There were no doors here. There was nowhere to hide that I could see. Timmy and I reluctantly went forward. As we got to the intersection, we saw the dead body of a man in a brown khaki uniform. His sightless eyes remained open. They stared up at the ceiling, glassy and still filled with horror. Deep gouge marks bit deeply into the flesh on his back and his arms and chest. His throat had been cut or bit open as well. A spreading puddle of red encircled his body. I saw a dark blur at the end of the hallway on the right. It looked like little more than a shadow. I whispered to Timmy, pointing. We decided to go left immediately. My heart was pounding at this point. I felt like a soldier walking through the no man's land of a war zone. I expected the attack to come at any moment. The hallway to the left had some doors. I sprinted forward as quietly as I could with Timmy close by my side. I read the first door. To medical ward. No, I whispered, going to the second one. I heard light footsteps behind me. Turning, I saw a creature from a nightmare sneaking up on us in the bloody glow of the emergency lights. Its skin was black and shiny like that of a centipede's. In its general form, it reminded me of a hairless werewolf. It towered over us, its eyes like bone-white cataracts, its claws as long and sharp as a dagger. And yet its face seemed almost reptilian. It had two small nose holes like a snake and a jaw that unhinged and dropped far below its head. I saw rows of blood-soaked fangs. It gave off a low, gurgling growl that emanated from its chest. With a rush of adrenaline and a sense of mortal terror, I pushed through the second door without reading the sign in the front. Timmy was right behind me. I heard him scream as he fell into me. I found myself in a prison dormitory and we weren't alone. As I hit the ground, I saw a white face peering out at me from behind the bunk bed. The man hiding there saw the abomination behind us and got up, screaming and running away. The creature growled, giving chase. In two powerful bounds, it had rushed across the dormitory and grabbed the man by the neck. I looked back at Timmy, seeing him groaning on the ground. Blood poured from deep cuts on his back. I grabbed him, pulling him up. "Let's go, we have no time," I said, but then I was cut off by the sound of a neck snapping. I looked back, seeing the creature had twisted the man's head around in a circle. It raised the limp body to its massive mouth and severed the head in a single and powerful bite. "Get me out of here, man, please," Timmy whispered as I pulled him back out into the hallway. I looked over, seeing another werewolf creature bounding down the hallway, chasing a man in a prison jumpsuit. I had no choice. I pulled Timmy toward the door labeled medical ward. With a creak of rusted hinges, it opened. We went inside to hide. "Maybe there's something in here we can use to bandage you up," I said to Timmy, pulling him down the short hallway toward a room filled with single beds. I didn't know why the rules said to avoid this place. It looked totally empty. Against the back wall, I saw a glass cabinet filled with bandages, rubbing alcohol, band-aids, and other various first aid supplies. I ran toward it. Timmy limped along after me, but still groaning. "God, I think those claws went down to the bone," he said. "Hey, it's gonna be okay," I said as I pulled out some antiseptic and bandages, adding, "Could have been a lot worse." The universe would immediately prove me right. I could hear a slight giggling from under one of the beds. Timmy and I both froze. Two rotted hands reached out, dragging the mutilated body of a young girl behind them. She had patches of garish, black stitches running across her face, hands and arms as well. Dark and clotted red dripped from the sides. She wore a smeared hospital gown and had no eyes. I looked into the empty sockets. They stared back at me like two black holes spinning in the void. As she rose, her giggles became full-blown laughter, a hysterical gurgling like the laugh of a dying person. And then she ran at me. I saw the silver gleam of a scalpel in her little hand. "No!" I screamed, raising my hands to protect myself. The scalpel came down, slicing my palm. It cut deeply. A cold, burning pain ran up my arm. I repressed the urge to scream. At that moment, the red emergency lights flicked off. Bright, fluorescent lights popped on, flickering and strobing in rapid succession. Timmy ran forward, tackling the undead girl. But I saw more small hands reaching out from under the beds, hands filled with sores and squirming larvae. I could see the bones of their hands through necrotic patches eaten into their flesh. I ran for Timmy, grabbing him and hauling him up. "It's time to go now," I screamed, pulling him forward as more undead boys and girls rose up, all with sharp knives and surgical instruments in their little hands. I felt a sudden pain in my leg, and looking down, I saw a knife sticking out of my thigh. The empty eye sockets of a little boy's face stared up at me, grinning like a skull. I collapsed onto the ground as we were surrounded. I prayed to God then, knowing that we would die. I prayed that he would forgive me for all of my mistakes, because I was on a fast track to the afterlife, and I would be seeing him in a few seconds. With a sharp cry of pain, I yanked the knife out of my leg, turning it on my attacker. And then a gunshot rang out. The nearest undead exploded in a shower of fragment and maggots. I looked up, seeing Shay standing at the door, his pistol raised. "Come on," he screamed. "Come on, you idiots, let's go now." Timmy and I didn't need any more encouragement. As Shay continued to blow apart the nearest of the undead abominations, we limped and scrambled towards them. My leg gave a shriek of pain with every step. We got out of the medical ward, battered and bruised, but still alive. "Why'd you come back, Shay?" I asked through pained breathing. Shay gave me a frantic look. "When I got back out to the car, the driver was dead. His throat was ripped out or something, I don't know. I grabbed his keys and I came back for you two. I don't know where we are, but I'm getting you out of here," he explained. I looked at him in amazement. I had never thought in a million years that Shay would risk his life to save some scumbag inmates. "So what's the plan?" Timmy asked, sweating heavily, his eyes wild and pained. "How are we getting out of here without dying?" Shay shrugged. "The door locked behind us when we came in," I said, "unless we can break it down and get back to the car." We passed by buttons labeled Emergency Dispatch under glowing red emergency signs. I wondered if we could get help somehow through them. "Halt!" Somebody cried from behind us. I looked back, seeing a man in a black correctional officer's uniform. He ran towards us, his hand on the radio hanging from his belt. But something immediately seemed off about the figure. As he got closer, I realized why. He had no face. His entire head was just smooth white skin, without hair or any signs of features. He spoke again, and the voice seemed to come from all around his body. "You must report to the medical ward," the strange figure said. "We do not allow injured people in the hallways." "Nah, we're fine," Shay said, grinning. "You see, buddy, I work for the DOC too." He pointed at the identification clipped to his breast pocket. The figure raised his radio to his lips. "We have resistance near Dormitory 1, the fake CO said into his radio before any of us could stop him. Shay ran forward, knocking the radio from his hand. The CO instantly straightened up and whipped out his pistol, pointing it at Shay's torso. He fired, and I saw Shay's chest explode in a blossoming flower. "No!" Timmy said, running forward. I saw a silver gleam in his hand, and I realized that he had taken one of the scalpels from the undead Shay had killed in the medical ward. As the fake CO spun to point the pistol at Timmy, Timmy ran into him, stabbing the scalpel deeply into the CO's neck. They fell together with Timmy on top of the fake CO. His body weight drove the scalpel deeper into his white and featureless skin. Blood the color of soot spurted from the wound. The gun went off and the bullet missed Timmy entirely and smashed into the ceiling. The CO's gurgling death throes seemed to come from all around his body. I grabbed Timmy. "Get the guns," I said. "They're both dead and we need them." He nodded, grabbing the CO's gun and taking an extra mag from his belt. I did the same with Shay's gun and magazine. I pressed the button labeled Emergency Dispatch as more faceless men appeared far off down the corridor. And then we fled as fast as we could from that hallway. But seeing as we were both in pretty bad shape, it wasn't very fast. At that point, I was glad to be alive though. We wandered around the prison, avoiding the faceless COs whenever we saw them patrolling the hallways. They would radio to each other, their voices always surrounding their bodies rather than coming from their heads, which I found extremely eerie and unsettling. A couple times I saw men in black SWAT suits with rifles gunning down the fake COs. I wondered if this was the emergency dispatch. Timmy and I avoided them as well, and we gave a wide berth any time that we heard gunfire. We passed cells with mummified corpses hanging from the ceiling. We passed by dormitories where the victims of the strange werewolf-like creatures littered the floors, rotting and stinking like roadkill. Occasionally, I would catch a glimpse of another survivor, a pale face peeking out from some hiding spot. But Timmy and I kept pushing forward, looking for a way out. We were in a sprawling gymnasium, sitting down and resting for a few minutes, when we had encountered the Warden. We heard a demonic roar from the hallway, a mixing of many strange and human tongues. As Timmy and I sat up quickly, a decapitated body flew into the gym, and a creature from a nightmare followed after it. The body smacked into the concrete wall with a soft and fleshy whack. The Warden stood 10 feet tall. He had on a black correctional officer's uniform and a leather visor cap. His face looked like it had no flesh. A thick layer of bone covered it with 2 reptilian eyes peering out from behind slitted pupils. He hissed, a forked tongue shooting out of his gaping maw. His fingers looked like sharp daggers of bone. A smell like old leather and blood arose from his body. "Shoot it!" I screamed, raising the pistol and firing at its head. The first shot blew off its visor cap, revealing the hairless, reptilian skull underneath. But the bullet only gouged the top of its head. It ran at us with powerful, bounding stabs, covering the distance in moments. Timmy and I fired as fast as we could as it got within a few feet of us. It bounded into Timmy like a freight train hitting a car. Timmy's body went flying and smashed against the back wall with the sound of bones shattering. I slammed another magazine in the pistol as the Warden turned to me. We had hit it. I saw. One of its eyes had exploded in a shower of red and vitreous fluid, and its head was bleeding pretty badly. I raised the gun, aiming for the same eye and firing. The Warden smacked his hand against his face as if he had forgotten something, falling to the floor. I ran forward, putting the pistol point blank against his ruined eye before emptying the clip. By the end, he wasn't moving anymore. "Oh God," I said, walking over to Timmy. I saw his shattered legs, his broken spine, and his snapped ribs. He coughed up red. "I'm sorry, Timmy, I really am." His head might have nodded slightly as he died, giving a final death rattle before falling still. I found a ring of keys on the Warden's body. In excitement, I ran downstairs and I tried the locked door, and it worked. I went to the van, pulling out the dead driver and starting it up. After smashing through the garage door, I drove it through the gate. It did catastrophic damage to the prison van, but it got me far enough away before the engine finally gave out. I don't know what kind of prison that is, but I hope that I never see that place again. I remember the first time that I did dope like it was yesterday. When I sniffed it, it felt like a powerful, relaxing massage flowing down my body like water. I remember running to the bathroom and throwing up over and over, but it felt so good that I didn't even care. I wouldn't be throwing up the next time that I did it though. My tolerance grew rapidly. Within months, the constant sickness became an ingrained fear, and eventually, my opioid addiction would take over my entire life. No one ever wakes up in the morning thinking, "I really wish I was a penniless, homeless drug addict." No child ever grows up saying that he wants to be a raging alcoholic. No one wants to go to prison, jail, detoxes, rehabs, mental asylums, or graveyards either. But when the addiction takes over, you don't have a choice of what you will or will not do. When addiction screams at you to jump, you only ask, how high? At a certain point, the idea of going without opioids becomes as instinctually frightening as going without food or water. In fact, a lot of addicts would much rather go without food and water than be plunged into the nightmarish, seemingly never-ending withdrawals. An addiction is like having a monkey on your back in some ways. If that monkey was demonic, rabid, and fused into your skin like some sort of sadistic Siamese twin, you know that if you don't do what the monkey says, it'll turn its blood-red eyes to you in fury. You know that it will claw and bite you until you're curled up in the fetal position on the floor screaming, "Please, no more." At a certain point, you don't even want to do the drugs anymore, but there's no real question of it. When the disease has progressed to its final stages, people who are in its grips become like an automaton, a machine. You wake up in the morning and the addiction screams, "Come, come, it's time." And even though you've just opened your eyes, you go over. You know you don't want to do drugs anymore, yet you find yourself sitting in front of them anyway. And after years of this, you give up all hope of ever having a life where you're not a soulless puppet, until the only way out in the end seems like death. But not me. In my conscious mind, I knew that I didn't have a problem, that I just hadn't figured out the perfect way to control my drug usage yet. My delusion told me that there was some grand middle path where I could get high anytime I wanted and then stop whenever I felt like it. I just hadn't figured out the perfect way to stop, but I would in time. Of course, this was insanity. After getting kicked out of my apartment and losing my job, I decided it was time to try rehab again. It certainly wasn't my first time there. I had tried everything before, from prison to jail to rehab to detox to methadone to NA meetings and plenty of other things. Somehow I hadn't figured out the perfect method yet, but because my sickness told me that I wasn't sick, I was convinced it was only a matter of time. Soon I would just quit and be free of this terrible addiction, but certainly not today. It would always have to be next Tuesday or maybe next Friday. Next Friday always seems good and reasonable, until it comes and you realize you're still hopeless and on your way to an early grave. Yet this time was also different in a fundamental way, because really at this point, I did want to stop. The party had long ago ended and now the addiction was a full-time job that paid only in wages of misery and death. So I went to detox for the 12th time. I suffered the same nightmarish withdrawals as a million times before, not sleeping for days, feeling my heart racing, seeing my hands and fingers trembling, feeling my stomach doing flips as it debated with itself whether it could hold down any food today. And then at the end of this madness, the nurse told me that there were no beds available in their long-term inpatient rehab, which was a place that I knew well, having spent months of my life there previously. "So what am I supposed to do?" I asked, scowling and furious. I actually wanted to try quitting forever this time, and the universe seemed to be laughing at me. I knew they had a quality rehab program and I wanted back in it. I wanted to try my best at actually paying attention when they told me about relapse prevention this time. Detox only lasted 4 or 5 days, and that is no way enough time for an opioid addict to recover. Someone who just goes to detox and leaves likely has a 99% chance of failure. The admissions nurse with a face like a wary weasel stared impassively through me. I noticed the small ketchup stain on the front of her white uniform. "Well, there are no beds available at our unit," she said. "I mean, with all this fentanyl crap and all the drug courts, there's a 2-month waitlist for a 90-day rehab in our unit now." I looked at her aghast. "I'm trying to get rid of a potentially fatal drug addiction here," I said, as if anybody could ever fully get that monkey off their back. People could get sober, yes, but I knew there were always addicts in the pits of their souls, and many only got through life by struggling one day at a time. "Well, there is an experimental drug rehab a couple of hours away," she said, looking down at a sheet of paper. "They contacted us asking for volunteers. They'll cover all the costs, including transportation to the facility." "What do you mean by experimental drug rehab?" I asked, confused. Is this like some new method of quitting drugs? It's not run by the Church of Scientology or anything, right? She laughed at that. Oh, no, it's nothing like that. Apparently, it's a government-run unit. They want to try out new methods of helping people with severe opioid addiction and alcoholism. If you're interested, you can go straight from here tomorrow when you get discharged. I thought about it for a long moment and I nodded at the nurse. Yeah, sure, I said. I'm willing to try anything. Drugs had finally beaten me into a state of submission. I remembered the first time that I went to rehab. I scoffed at their insane 12-step programs and their focus on a higher power. I thought that it sounded wacky, and I was in no way interested in drinking their Kool-Aid. Now I would listen to absolutely anything, try anything with even the smallest chance of working. Drugs had so successfully dragged me down that I was finally in a state of reasonableness, a fairly rare thing for an addict, and one that usually takes many years to develop. A black SUV pulled up in front of the detox unit the next day. I wasn't the only volunteer that they had found, apparently. A pretty young blonde girl with ancient, nervous eyes sat next to me, as well as some large guy from Boston with far too many shamrock tattoos in his body and a Red Sox cap on his head. We all sat in the back. The driver had an opaque black window up, preventing us from seeing him or talking to him. Hey, I'm Haley, the girl said, extending a trembling hand. Her pupils looked large and she looked ill at ease. Though I still wasn't feeling too good, I was immediately interested and shook her hand. I'm Jay, I said, not feeling overly conversational. The Red Sox guy apparently agreed. Simon, the man grunted, looking back down at the book that he was reading. I saw with interest that it was the big book from Alcoholics Anonymous. Do you know anything about this place that we're going to? I asked them. Simon just murmured and shook his head. It didn't seem like he wanted to talk. But the girl perked up instantly. Well, the nurse didn't seem to know much, but I read through that the paper they made us sign, Haley said, brushing a lock of her long hair behind her ears. Her perfume reminded me of springtime flowers and mountain peaks. You read the whole thing? I said, surprised. I hadn't read any of it. I wondered whether I had made a mistake. She nodded, the faint trace of a smile playing in the corners of her lips. It's some brand new, totally revolutionary addiction treatment the government has developed in response to all the deaths from the recent crisis, she said. Do you know what exposure therapy is? Simon perked up at this, and he pushed his glasses up on his nose. I've read about that, he said in a deep voice. That's a way of dealing with phobias, right? Like if somebody is afraid of spiders, they show them pictures and videos of spiders to desensitize them. And eventually maybe they put a spider in a cage in front of them. Yeah, pretty much, Haley said, and I frowned. I don't get it. What does that have to do with addiction treatment? Are they going to show us pictures of bodies from overdoses until we change our minds? Because that doesn't work. I already know that I'll die if I don't stop. I think that deep down I've known that for a very long time. Haley just shook her head, bereft of any answers. I have no idea how exposure therapy could apply to addiction treatment. Guess we'll find out when we get there. A couple hours later, we entered a long and winding dirt road. I saw the complex looming out of the top of the rolling New England hills like a knife hilt sticking out of a chest. It was garish. Massive black towers surrounded by electrified fences and rolls of razor wire greeted us as we pulled up to the gate. Smaller wooden guard towers with observation decks like fire watchtowers stood at each of the four corners of the square complex. This looks like Guantanamo Bay, Simon observed. He suddenly looked very uncomfortable and nervous. He began shifting his large bulk around the seat. The springs gave an exasperated groan, and then he reached back and gingerly pulled his sweatpants out his rear without any sense of embarrassment. Why do they even need all this razor wire? Why the guard towers? I asked. The driver up front finally rolled down the divider. "Stay put, guys," the driver said in a nasally, reedy voice. "Don't try to get out until they give the all clear. They have snipers trained in this position if you try anything." "What?" Simon yelled, stunned out of his introspection. "What is this, a joke?" The driver slowly rolled the divider back up in response. I sat there not knowing what to think. A soldier clad in all black came out of a small guardhouse at the entrance. He had a rifle in his hands and the finger on the trigger. He walked slowly over and knelt down. I saw him talk to the driver, but I didn't know what they said. A moment later, he pressed a button and the 20-foot-tall metal gate began to slowly roll to the side. "I have a bad feeling about this," I said as he drove us inside. Haley and Simon both looked pale, their eyes wide and terrified as if we were entering a war zone. A garage door opened in the slick metallic black surface of the towers. They looked like giant, dark lighthouses looming overhead, except they had no windows and no lights. However, dozens of spotlights were placed to the top of the fences in the guard towers. At night, I figured this place would be more lit up than a football stadium. The driver drove into the garage. A sudden darkness overcame us. The doors unlocked with a clicking sound and he rolled down the divider. "Get out," he said abruptly. "Now." We didn't hesitate. I pulled open the door and I was still somewhat excited to see this new revolutionary rehab unit. The razor wire and the rifles had given me quite a bit of pause, but perhaps they kept convicted criminals here in a different unit. The more that I thought about that, the more sense that it made. I began to relax. The driver rolled up his window and wouldn't talk to us anymore. The garage door behind him stayed closed. No one came to greet us. I saw a door nearby and dim light came through at the bottom. Figuring that we could find somebody who worked here over there, I walked over and pushed it open. Haley and Simon followed close behind me. Bright fluorescent lights streamed down over a disgusting mold-filled hallway that disappeared far in front of us in a straight line. I saw patches of black mold rising like hair from the soggy floorboards. Splintering doors stood lining both sides of the hallway, some of them hanging off their hinges and others laid out flat on the floor. "Ew, what is this?" Haley said, a look of disgust crossing her face. Simon pointed to the door. "Hey, there's something nailed to it," he said, "a piece of paper." I looked and he was right. I quickly walked over to it and I pulled it off. It had what looked like splatters of red across the front. I took it, frowning as I read the yellowed, ancient-looking sheet aloud to our little group. Rules to survive the Gray Path. 1. Do not sleep in the comfortable room filled with soft moss and poppies. 2. If you see the hobo with a mouth across his stomach, you must kill him. 3. Stay away from the patients in the delirium tremors ward. Anything they see comes true. 4. If you hear the hymns of the needle freak over the speakers, it means they have gotten out and you must hide. Gray Path? Simon asked, curious. Is that the name of this place? If you read the contract you guys signed, you would already know that, Haley said, looking closer at the scrap of paper. Is that blood? She had noticed the dark red stains sunk into the ancient paper. Hey guys, I asked, feeling nervous again. Does anybody know that you're here? Like family or friends or anything? They both shook their heads. My family hasn't talked to me in a couple years, Haley admitted sheepishly. Same. Simon grunted and I nodded. Yeah, me too, I said, thinking. Do you think that's why they chose us? Because nobody would notice that we're missing. A look of horror crossed both their faces as they stood there. Like, did you even tell any of your friends? Either of you guys? I don't actually have any friends, Simon admitted, rubbing the back of his hair. Haley just shook her head. Actually, like Simon, I didn't really have any friends anymore. My addiction had sent them all away. Heck, I had given everything away. As I looked back, a deep sense of regret and remorse filled my soul. We started walking down the hallway, avoiding the large patches of yellow and black mold that sprouted like bushes from the soggy wood. The smell like decomposing meat and mushrooms filled the area. Haley wrinkled her nose. The hallway turned at a 90-degree angle. It felt like we had been walking down it for at least 15 minutes. It was mind-boggling how big this place was. I didn't realize it when we had pulled in, but the black towers I saw, they must have extended a few thousands of feet into the hills. Why would somebody build a place this big? Simon asked, looking around with an inquisitive eye. And why would they let the hallways rot and grow soggy like this? It doesn't make any sense. A deep, choking sob cut him off. It came from around the corner. "Hello?" Haley called out. I grabbed her shoulder, hissing in her ear. "Shh," I said. "What do you think you're doing?" "Whoever it is already knows that we're here," she said. She started slowly tiptoeing forward to peek around the corner. A massive, dirty figure ran straight into her, knocking hard into the wall. She smacked her head hard. It made a hollow, bonking sound like a coconut being dropped on a concrete floor. She stumbled and fell to the ground. She started crawling away as I looked up at the abomination sprinting at me and Simon now. Red streamed from a gash on her forehead. She looked dazed and confused, but I had no time to check on Haley. The eldritch creature wore tattered rags around his shoulders and his waist. His head nearly scraped the ceiling about 8 feet above our heads. I saw red stains and dried yellow pus all over his skin. Deep black spots were eaten into his flesh, forming deep circular patches across his skin, like the blast holes of a nuclear war. Purplish streaks went out in all directions from the infected wounds, running across his body like polluted streams. He turned his face towards us, and I saw a monstrous creature only glimpsed in the wildest of nightmares. In his entirely hairless face, he had one giant eye. It took up the entirety of the front of his head. It rolled in its socket, the pupil large and glassy, the yellow, jaundiced sclera streaked with bloody red veins that stretched outwards like the roots of a tree. His scarred torso had an enormous mouth running across the area where his belly button should have been. The purplish, cracked lips formed into a snarl, showing many razor-sharp fangs. They curved inwards like the teeth of a shark. They snapped and bit at the air, the entire stomach and chest, rippling and morphing as giant muscles worked furiously under his mutilated skin. An odor of rotted cheese emanated from the creature, mixing with the sickly smell of infection that rose from its decaying flesh. He made a sound like a crying baby, his enormous chest mouth opening with an ear-splitting wail as streams of dirty tears ran down his filthy body. Simon turned and ran. With a predator's instinct, the nightmarish hobo gave chase, his naked bloody feet slapping hard against the soggy floor of the hallway as he sprinted forward in a blur. Simon frantically tried a random door and disappeared into a room. Roaring, the creature tried to squeeze through the relatively small door. It looked like a cockroach trying to slip through a tiny crack. It worked its body through the threshold, cracking the wood. It smashed its large, scarred hands against the wood. I heard the building shake with every blow and saw deep fissures running through the wall. I turned, looking for Haley. We needed help if we were going to kill this thing, but realistically, how could we possibly kill it without any weapons? 10 feet down the hallway, a door stood open to a room that glowed with a soft blue light. I walked toward it hesitantly, still hearing the cacophony the creature made as it chased Simon. "Haley," I whispered sharply, "where are you?" I saw drops of red leading into the room from when she had hit her head. I followed them like a trail of breadcrumbs. Beyond the threshold, I saw a beautiful scene. Layer after layer of soft green moss covered the floor. From the ground, unnaturally large opium poppies extended up to the ceiling. They swayed slightly, as if a non-existent breeze blew through the room. A sweet earthy smell radiated from their beautiful pink and white flowers. I felt a sense of calmness and relaxation come over me. A sense of tiredness came over my mind, and my eyelids began to droop. And then I saw Haley laying on the ground asleep. All around her, large, tick-like bugs scattered and ran. Each was the size of a baseball. They took turns biting Haley at areas of exposed skin, latching onto her and sucking her blood. A few had already grown fat and changed from a jet black to a dark red. I looked in horror at Haley's pale face. "No!" I screamed, running forward. I began ripping them off of her, a sense of adrenaline coming over me. It instantly banished any thought of sleep. Haley's eyes fluttered open as drops of red flew from the creature's mouths. I ripped them off one by one. After I had gotten nearly a dozen of them off her, she stood up, dripping red from countless bite marks. Her face looked pale and her lips slightly blue. She wavered on her feet, trembling. I thought that she might pass out, and I held her arm tightly. "Get out of here," I whisper-shouted at her. The monstrous black ticks still circled us, trying to crawl up on our legs and bite us. I kept kicking on them and stomping them. Their bodies exploded under my shoe like a water balloon filled with dark red blood. Haley and I started to turn when a silhouette filled the doorway. The hobo leered at us from inside the room of moss and poppies. He had Simon's head in one of his filthy hands, the long dirty nails of his fingers biting deeply into his white skin. He threw it at us, hitting me hard in the chest and knocking the air out of my lungs. I screamed, looking down at Simon's cyanotic flesh and sightless staring eyes. His blue lips were pressed together as if in an expression of disapproval. I felt more of the ticks trying to climb up my legs. As the hobo began trying to smash his way through the doorway into the room, getting stuck just like he did before, a desperate idea came to me. I picked up one of the tick creatures, holding it gingerly by its sides. It tried to snap and bite at me like an angry cobra, but I quickly threw it at the hobo's eye. The tick soared through the air in a graceful arc, landing on the hobo's face. Its black, spider-like legs writhed, twisting around the back of his head. The hobo's arms were held back by the door and his body was wedged in the threshold. He screamed as the tick went for his eye. The hobo tried to close the massive lid, but the tick's probing mouth parts punctured through. A waterfall of vitreous fluid and blood streamed down the hobo's face. In a panic, the hobo pulled forwards into the room, taking half of the wall with him. It cracked and fell apart with a sound like collapsing bricks. Haley and I took the opportunity to sprint through one of the newly formed gaps and out into the hallway. Blind, the hobo spun in circles as the ticks surrounded him, crawling up his legs and chest. He smashed himself over and over using his large, scarred hands to splatter their insectile bodies all over his skin. But only more came. And soon he fell down, wailing with noises like a frantic baby under the army of dozens of enormous, mutated ticks. Haley and I ran down the hallway, seeing the rest of Simon's body laying over the threshold of the room that he had tried to hide in. With the final wails of the hobo following us, we fled that pit of horrors only to find that we hadn't gone nearly far enough. We found a staircase and we began climbing. We didn't know where we were going, but we figured if the bottom floor was terrible, perhaps the topmost floor was significantly better. The stairs went up about 15 stories. The rusted rails had fallen off and deep cracks like the fault lines of an earthquake ran through the concrete steps. They looked like they were getting ready to crumble into dust. We opened the door to the top floor. It gave a loud shriek of rusted metal. I winced, glancing down the hallway. It looked like an apocalyptic hospital ward. The white walls had yellowed with age and stained with drops of dark and ancient blood. Smashed windows looked on empty units with rolling beds. Many had pieces of human skin or deep layers of red caking their surfaces. A cacophony of white noise emanated from speakers above our heads. A hissing of static shattered the silence. Haley and I both jumped. And then a diseased, raspy voice began to sound over the ancient speaker system of the hospital ward. The lunatic god stares down black and cold. We eat the bodies of the weak and old. We change ourselves to fit his cries, feeling as our humanity slowly dies. We know that we are dead and weak, and so we all sing the hymns of the needle freak. "Oh God, not again," Haley whispered, her eyes filled with horror. "What's going to happen this time?" I grabbed her hand, hissing in her ear. "Run, run, we need to get out of the hallway." I said as doors slammed open all up and down the hospital ward. I saw dozens of walking corpses slumped forward, shambling and dragging their broken bodies slowly behind them. Some had marks of car accidents, such as the first young man that I saw with pieces of his leg bone sticking out through his skin and a deep gash through his skull. Others looked like they had died of overdoses, some of them still having needles sticking out of their arms. Haley and I chose a random ward, crashing through the door. Empty infant cribs stood all around us. Some had tiny red-stained clothes still in the cribs. I saw another door in the back hanging off of its hinges. I ran through, finding myself in a private room. A man stood there without eyes, the empty sockets bare and open like two silently screaming mouths. "My God, what happened to you?" Haley screamed, backing up quickly. I looked at the sign above the door with a growing sense of horror. It read, "Delirium Tremors Ward." "They kept coming," he said in a dead voice. "The spiders crawling on the floors, the baby crawling on the ceiling. My son, he died, you see, in his crib. I was too drunk to check on him at the time. Didn't find him for 12 hours, but here he's..." He stopped, inhaling deeply. "They're all here. I felt their claws on me. I saw his blue lips as his head spun around to 180 degrees and he showed me a mouthful of needles. A mouthful of needles." He trailed off, clawing at his hair with dirty hands. "I had to take my eyes out to stop seeing. I couldn't keep seeing it, I couldn't. Reality is ripping at the seams." The eyeless man continued, his gouged out sockets slowly dribbling red down his cheeks like crimson tears. "It's ripping and I have nothing to hold on to now. My son won't stop watching me with those black eyes of his. Please, make it stop." As he spoke, I saw something crawling above us in the ceiling. I looked up, seeing the baby. He clung to the ceiling like a spider hanging upside down. His stiff limbs reached forward, dragging himself along and wailing. His head began to spin around until it was completely backwards. The skin on its neck spiraled around in a sickening way. The baby gave a hiss like a snake. Its pure black eyes flew open and it showed a mouth filled with thousands of black needles that shimmered like obsidian under the flickering fluorescent light. Haley walked forward calmly, putting her hand on the man. From the room full of cribs, I heard shuffling and groaning. The corpses were nearing. "Your baby has found a way out," Haley said comfortingly. "A door, can you see it? It leads to beautiful rolling hills and open fields filled with flowers." The man's face seemed to slacken. I looked behind us, seeing a dead man approaching. He had black stitches running down his chest and countless scars from the drugs over his arms. Behind him, dozens of more corpses writhed and shambled towards us. We were running out of time. "A door," the eyeless man said. "I don't." "Yes, see it," Haley encouraged him. "It's a big door and your baby can go through it and find peace. Do you see it?" The man hesitated. I saw a door appearing in the wall nearby, slowly phasing into view. The baby's head finished spinning so that its neck was now hyperextended at 360 degrees. And then it gave a triumphant cry and skittered toward the door like a centipede chasing a prey. Beyond the threshold of the door, I saw the forests of New England. The sun beat down natural and beautiful, unlike all this horrible flickering fluorescent light. I grabbed Haley's hand and ran through the door. It closed behind us with a popping sound. We found ourselves in the middle of the woods. We began walking and discovered a trail which eventually took us to a road. A couple of hours later, we found a town. Grateful to be alive, we didn't wonder about the fact that we had ended up 5 hours away from where we had started. Haley and I have been sober ever since. I don't know what kind of demonic place we were kidnapped and taken to, but I seriously doubt the government knew anything about it. I tried to find out more information about Gray Path and who ran it, but I couldn't find any evidence even indicating the place existed. After what I saw there though, I have never had an easier time staying sober. Dealing with the horrors and nightmares of Gray Path, seeing the walking corpses and the end stages of addiction, it changed me in a fundamental way. I no longer have any desire to use drugs, and God willing, I will never ever relapse again.